unless we do what our soul wants us to do, what we really feel in our heart, then sometimes life can really literally become not worth living, you know. I think a lot of depression, a lot of suicide happens when people aren't doing what they feel they should with their lives. So if you're not using your life for what you believe it's called to be about, then why, you know, a lot of the joy and the purpose runs out of it, you know, and we can do a lot of damage to ourselves and other people. So
my guest in this episode is Luke Concannon, a fiercely passionate English singer-songwriter who, with his own record label, has sold millions of records across the world while keeping his feet firmly on the ground. Like so many other English artists, including Ed Sheeran, Oasis, Morrissey, Lennon and McCartney and others, Luke grew up in an English household firmly rooted in Irish heritage and the traditions of family gatherings and sing-songs. His band Nizlopi achieved mass fame with their number one hit, the JCB song, which is written as a beautiful ode from a young Luke to his father. Nizlopi had a famously D.I.Y. approach, and their raw energy inspired a young Ed Sheeran to become one of their biggest fans. Ed cites them as a major influence on him and once spent 2 weeks on the road with the band learning the ropes. After Nizlopi ended, Luke went through a period of reflection and discovery, including what he calls a hitchhiking vision quest to Palestine, where he worked as a peace worker. Now a solo artist living in Boston, he continues to invest in his music and is a powerful voice for love and justice through his words and his music and his approach to life in general. Luke and I have some mutual friends, and it felt destined that we'd end up meeting eventually, and what was originally intended to be an interview in Boston ended up through a random series of events that led us to the home of French artist Veronique Castellano in Gort in County Galway in the beautiful west of Ireland. We hit it off immediately, and the conversation was one of the most enjoyable I've had in a long time, and it proved to be a fascinating insight into this big-hearted man who's dedicated to spreading hope and joy wherever he goes. I know you're going to enjoy listening to the wonderful Luke Concannon. Luke Concannon, we've finally made it happen. I checked my email this morning and I think we've had, would you believe it, 33 emails to make this interview happen.
33 emails, oh my God. We've been like having a bromance.
Yeah, between a few different countries as well. So this interview all started with me heading to the US, thinking I might get to Boston, hearing from Gary Dunn that you lived in Boston, and realising that you were then in Clare for the summer while I was in the US.
Yeah, we swapped countries.
And now here we are in South County Galway in Gort, up a laneway somewhere in a beautiful French woman's house called Veronique. And the interview was kindly set up. The house was kindly sourced by a good friend of mine called Michael McCahan. So I'm giving credits to everybody involved.
Go
so
Michael.
It's been a real community gathering to get us together.
Yeah, and I'm thrilled. I was just really excited because I watched your TED Talk and I felt like there was something really grounded and beautiful about what you were sharing. And frankly, I just love talking about the sort of stuff we're going to talk about.
Cool. Bring it on. Yeah, like I think in the email thread it was one of those interviews that either of us could have dropped it at any one time, and it at the end of the day it felt like a conversation that needed to happen, so let's make it happen now. Where will we start, Luke? Just before we began the interview, you were telling me about your last couple of weeks, and you told me that your grandmother has just passed away. Yeah. And just knowing a little bit about you and not too much, I know that, or I get the sense that family and heritage has been a big part of your journey. Can you tell me a little bit about your grandmother and what she's meant to you?
I'm thrilled that you'd ask, yeah. So Eileen O'Sullivan was her maiden name. She's just really important to me. I was trying to tell her once, like, I was trying to say basically that spiritually she just kind of felt like an anchor for me, and that there was this peace and like grace about her. She grew up in County Kerry, just outside of Dingle, speaking Gaelic, barefoot, you know, eating the fish that her dad caught and the cabbage that her mum grew. And there's just something about indigenousness. She had an Irish indigenousness that just people felt at home and blessed by her. You know, she prayed half an hour every night of her life, and it was all like hoping we'd be safe and happy and healthy and successful.
It's all good stuff.
Yeah. And so I think at a time like this where she's just passed, there's something about just being very grateful and also just wondering how to pass that on, that indigenous love and kindness and groundedness, and I guess I've got some figuring out to do.
Yeah. So can you tell me tell me the connection with Ireland in general, because you grew up as an Irish English guy, and even thinking about that, we talk about Irish Americans, but we don't talk about Irish English as an identity almost. But yet we celebrate Shane MacGowan and everything. But it's
the Beatles, like Paul McCartney and John Lennon. Yeah, Irish English. Yeah,
it's a definite vein running through you and your music and everything, isn't it?
And England, I think it's huge. I was at a spiritual community in France a couple of weeks back, and I was journaling, and I was in an exercise where you write about major turning points in your life, like a river of your life, and what were the major things. And the first major turning point I felt was in my life, born in England, growing up in England, was that Irishness and Ireland were such a part of me and my life and my family. And at the age of 4, we took a family holiday to Kerry, to Nan's family, and then 5 we went back for a wedding, and my nan, my great aunt, my parents and friends. And there was something about the beauty of Inchstrand and of the Dingle Peninsula of Kerry, and of the slowness and the kindness and the humility of people. I still remember staying on a family farm and being fed goose eggs and duck eggs from the farm, and there was a sense of from the heartness and gentleness and wildness, and crack, you know. There was fun and music. I think what it did was it gave me a sense of belonging that was so refreshing in the context of growing up in the middle of England, where the land is very tamed, where it's literally TV Nation, you know, as in like everyone at night just watches television. You live in suburbs that are very commodified and structured and modern and industrial. And to experience this sort of spirit of Ireland and have that in my life, and be raised by my dad, who's an Uilleann Piper character, you know, and be raised a lot by my Irish grandparents, was, I think it sort of saved my my sense of self and sense of what was possible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking about Kerry and West Kerry and the west coast of Ireland versus that Midlands of England, where I've been many times. And my friend Diarmuid Ling has relocated there recently, and he talks a lot about the wildness, you know. But it's not just about the wildness of the land, it's the wildness of the people. And maybe a lot of us have been brought up to believe as wildness as in a negative context, whereas if we reframe it, does wildness equate with freedom?
Yeah.
You know, so So I'm wondering, therefore, in your music, and we'll get to, you know, the lyrics and your upcoming single and everything, but the quest for freedom is ultimately mankind's quest, if you like, and in looking at those indigenous places that maybe still have that current running through them. It feels like you tapped into that well through your childhood and your grandmother, and now you're out in the world pollinating the wildness around.
There's this thing of going out on a limb. Alastair McIntosh, I know you've interviewed and is a big mentor of mine. One of the phrases he brings from the Highlands is go out on a limb, that's where all the blossom is. And there's something about taking those wild risks that I think is there in Irish culture. Like people talk about the Irish being mad, but you know, there's this sort of thing like they're crazy, the Irish are crazy. But I think there's something about nature is wild and does do unpredictable things, and I think that's where a lot of the possibilities in art come from, is the fact that if you go out on a limb, things can happen that you wouldn't know, but you keep going and they start to grow. You know, the art is wildness. And freedom. I like what you say about that. Yeah,
versus that suburban tarmacked pretty lawn where everything is controlled, contrived, conformed, versus the possibilitarianness of life where we just don't know where it's all going to go. So for instance, we could script this interview right within an inch of its life, and we could try to make it safe and predictable and guarantee success, whereas we've tried to maybe embrace it more as a wildness. And I try to do that with all these interviews, that obviously there's prep that goes into them, but we just allow it to be and trust that wildness equates with freedom, equates with the truth of what it needs to come out in life.
I think something that Ireland's been good at, and this thing about indigenousness, what does that mean? It means people who are connected to the land, people who are connected to their ancestors, their culture, their community. I think Ireland's been good at kind of holding a mirror up to the imperial nature of Europe, you know. And I think the reason that a lot of people have romantic notions and love for Ireland is that it wasn't an imperial or colonial power, really. I mean, you might be able to speak more about that than me, but and so it's a place in Europe that can maybe understand what it's like to be to be oppressed, and maybe what it's like to be like what it's like for African people, or what it's like for Indian people. I mean, it's sort of, maybe it's dangerous territory because I don't want to appropriate anybody's story then, but there's been a critique of colonialism that can come out of these places, which is essential for us to recover our humanity. Does that speak to you?
Oh, absolutely it does. And I mean, it is a dangerous territory because another version of that is for us to be victims and to see ourselves as victims, and I was brought up with some of that story in this country where we're the most oppressed nation in the world, and then I realised that quite almost the vast majority of countries in the world have been conquered and colonised. And then if you look at it with a deeper lens, you can almost start to see the oppressors as oppressed in themselves, and to realise that it's not just as simple as casting an ugly spell on England or Portugal, Italy, Spain. Those people have their stories too, and maybe the people have been oppressed by their own, and in so many ways we in Ireland have been oppressed by some of our own people, and would maybe oppress if given the chance as well. And that is that whole matrix of, or spectrum of humanity. And Mother Teresa used to say that there's a Hitler inside all of us kind of thing, and to hold up the shadow to the psyche. But I do very much identify with that sense of solidarity with the oppressed, and I think it's important as we face and see a refugee crisis that is ongoing, and remind ourselves, and I've just back from the States, you live in the States at a time where they're trying to shut down borders and spread a lot of division, that most people ended up in the States because they were fleeing oppression in the first place.
Yeah.
And in fact, then when we go back to look at slavery, many ended up in the US because they were forced to arrive there. So complicated territory we've landed into. Tell me about that political consciousness, Luke. Where does that come from for you? Has that come from either your mother or your father, or how did that enter your creativity and your music?
Yeah, you're good at this. That's a great link in. I remember my granddad, who was from Roscommon. I'd go to my nan and granddad's most nights after school, as my parents were young in England and trying to sort of make their living and work in long hours and stuff. So I'd be at my Irish grandparents' house in England, and Granddad would be gone early. I think he'd leave the house maybe 7 or something, and he'd get back at 5, and he'd just be talking about how hard working people work. He'd be digging the roads, laying tarmac, and I got this sense of, that they lived in a council house that they bought. But both my grandparents lived a hard life, a working class life, and I remember that soaking into me. Like, why is it hard? Why do people have to work this hard and be so stressed? He didn't sleep because he was stressed. So there was something of that soaking in. Growing up in one foot in a working class Irish context, and then also my mum got a good job and is like a warrior, and started doing well there in the 80s, and we started having some material wealth and living a middle class lifestyle and feeling the discomfort of that and of privilege, So I think having a foot in both worlds, in England and in Irish culture, in like a working class world and in a middle class world, it created some tension that had to be resolved.
So look, I'm curious as to your upbringing, and then particularly I'm always interested in like the early teenage years and puberty hits and boys or girls or rock and roll and drugs and what was going on for you around that time? And or none of the above. You were playing chess, and you're not that there's anything wrong with that.
I was, because I'd grown up singing ballads at family parties and stuff. I was the one boy in the secondary school who was willing to sing, because it's just, it wasn't you weren't tough or hard if you were a singer, but I didn't care. I'd done it all my life. So I got into bands, and that was just, it was just such a fun, cool way to experience growing up as a teenager. We'd be writing songs together, and the band I'm most known for, Nizlopi, the JCB song and all that, we were a duo who first started writing together when we were 13, John and I, at school. So yeah, we formed a band, played a Metallica and a Guns N' Roses song, and after, terrified, we had like 2 weeks to pull a show together, and so scared. And then actually the feeling of doing it, that was a kind of a coming of age thing. Like, I did something I was really frightened of.
Yeah.
And I was thinking on the way here actually about how some people say that modern life is so boring or safe. But I think it may be in the sort of work that both of us do, where you're going out in front of people and you're taking risks. Life isn't boring as an artist or as a performer. Like there's some risk there. So yeah, we started.
So you learned that lesson early on,
like 13.
Yeah, like it's one of the obvious. It's in the name of the podcast. You know, the theme of courage, and that's an example there of the 13-year-old that had 2 weeks to prepare for a gig.
Yeah.
There are many other 13-year-olds that had the same opportunity and didn't do the gig. You know, it's to draw on that courage, and once you do it once, you then have a fuel supply to do it again, and it keeps moving.
Yeah, often before a gig I think, why on earth do I do this to myself? Like, why am
Still?
I'm like, you know, I might be feeling a bit ill or tired or vulnerable, and now I've got to get up on stage in front of a room full of people and say, like, this is me, or this is what I feel, or this is a song I wrote, or whatever. But then afterwards there's always there's that feeling of going through the fire and being glad, you know. And
was that encouraged from through examples of your parents, or do you think that cultural, like I have this image of that Irish traditional setting where everybody kind of gets up and gives it a go, including the young people. So that courage is almost there culturally.
That was so valuable. I wrote a poem about this. Can I?
Oh man, and you have it with you?
I have got it with
Great.
me. I put this out on the EP I released a couple of months back called In the Sea. Here we go. I might sit back a bit because I might get loud.
Yeah, no, it's cool.
Okay. I suppose this is going back to the 80s as a kid. The old TV. How central you were to our lives. Watching news, snooker and pop stars, Formula One, chat shows, cartoons and soap operas with whiskey, wine, beer and tea. Would you look at that Egypt? Grandad would shout at the television. He makes me sick. I'd cuddle into Grandad on the sofa, a love of connection between the two of us. He had a warm heart beneath all his scars. It was like falling back into the sweetness of the ancestors. Thank God for our parties where we danced and laughed and sang together, where we talked around the bonfire Grandad made, where us children invented plays and dance routines to songs, where Nan would ask for Dublin in the rare old times or the Creole Girl. These sweet returnings to the village from out of the smog of TV nation. Let's gather the clans, friends. The nations need each other, and I need to be awoken by your song, and you by mine.
Oh, that's amazing. That's lovely, man. And you wrote a song about that?
Well, actually, that was just a poem I put on the EP, just to say, like, that was the place that it all started, really, was that, like you say, a place where it's natural to sing. My girlfriend's an opera singer, and you know, her family lament the fact that even though they all are trained musicians, they never sing together, because in that culture you have to either be like super high level or you don't do it.
Yeah.
And that's a shame, because the most moving songs are often when people just open their heart and they're imperfect.
And that's the difference perhaps with a folk tradition versus other traditions, because folk literally means off the people, off the folk.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like your music is very much a folk sensibility and cultural DNA, but it's contemporary as well. It feels that you are part of a wave of that coming through, and like I mentioned Gary Dunn as well, and like obviously Ed Sheeran as well, and then there's the Irish link throughout all of that. It's like, do you think music has lost that, like that we need folk revolution?
it seems that people are so hungry to be artists, you know, to be creating. Everyone has got that kind of creative spark in them. When my friends and I host workshops, people are so hungry to be in that environment. And the thing most people need to be told, well, there's two things and they're the same kind of theme. One is that we need to let go of our perfectionism. Like we need to just make mistakes and be okay with the vulnerability. And the other thing is that if we give ourselves unlimited time to create things, then we'll never do it. But if we say I've got half an hour, I'm going to write a poem, or I'm going to release a song on YouTube next week that I'm going to write over the next week, then we start going again. You know, there's something about this challenging ourselves to be brave. Do you relate to that?
Yeah, I definitely relate to having a deadline anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and actually what's coming to mind is like there's a whole variety of people who listen to these podcasts, but most people who are listening are on a journey or on the start of a journey of seeking out questions and creating challenges for themselves. So I'm going to lay down one for the listener, whoever they might be, that, and within an hour of finishing this podcast, you go and take on some creative endeavor for yourself and send Luke and I a tweet or a Facebook message and let us know how you get on. I'd be curious to see if that thread gets picked up, because we're all essentially challenging each other, but there is an element of accountability that there are so many things we want to do in the world, but unless the bar, there does need to be some sort of a boundary or I don't know.
Yeah, there needs to be. I mean, we call them deadlines, but they're also lifelines, aren't they?
Yeah, love it.
Because it's like we need the courage and the wakeness that comes with like, well, I've got to do it now rather than later. So
and do you set those yourself, those lifelines? You know, because you're an independent artist primarily.
It's and it's a big danger with being as independent as I have been, is that you know, like my first solo album after Nizlopi, it took me like 5 years, and I'm relentlessly proud of it. I'm really, really proud of it. But there's a problem with, if you give yourself no limit, then you'll maybe make something that's really great, but it's slow. Like it's really slow, and you could be doing more. So yeah, I have to challenge myself. And I've been getting coached for the last 6 months. I was cynical about coaching because I was brought up in Britain, and you know, anything that sounds American.
Yeah.
But actually, it's just it's been amazing to take education into adult life. Like we don't have enough chances to stay in education, like in learning relationships.
So this is a type of life coaching that you're getting, or creative coaching?
Yeah, Alan Seid is his name. You can Google him, SEID, and he does wonderful work. And he challenged me from the start. He was like, well, before we speak in 2 weeks' time, I want you to have written a new song and put it out on the internet. So I did that. It's on my YouTube channel. But and that just showed me that if you have that focus, then you can flow.
Yeah. And what was it in you that decided that you would like that challenge to be coached or have a coach? Was there a need there?
Some lostness. I felt pretty lost. You know, I was in this context of as a young man there with Nizlopi, with the band that I was in. We set up a record label, values-based, independent record label with my parents, because my dad was like, he's a musician, he was our manager. My mum was kind of like the financial whiz kid. My cousin was the social media manager. My girlfriend was working with us. It was like a cottage industry, very, very sort of scary to have that many close relationships. And, you know, somehow we outcompeted the major record labels, and it was like your local grocery shop selling more vegetables than all the Tesco's in the country one week. It was mad what we managed to do. You know, we inspired the young Ed Sheeran. Daniel Day-Lewis was a fan. Tony Benn wrote me a letter wishing me luck with the politics of the songwriting. We did amazing things from this little community, independent community. But then we burnt out, as happens with a lot of folk who go out on a limb like that. And I went out on my own. You know, I hitchhiked to Palestine as a kind of vision quest. to get new inspiration. And I've been on my own since 2008 as a solo artist. And the danger is that having left what came naturally, you know, the friends you make at school, the family you grow up with, the community and culture you grow up with, to try and find the thing you're looking for in your heart, is that there's the lostness there in the middle of life's journey. I found myself on a dark path, it says in Dante's Inferno. You know, in the middle of the journey, that there's shadows that we have to confront. And I think I've needed to get help to navigate through the dangers that are in the middle of life, where we haven't got the same natural energy that we had at the beginning, and yet we know we're trying to get somewhere, but how do we get there?
Do you feel like when you almost left the fold of the family co-op band enterprise that you are now stripped bare on your own?
Yeah.
There was a new exposure there. Yeah. Did you fall into what may be called a depression, or is that, you know, did you have that sort of fog or cloud on you?
Yeah, I think it was a breakdown in the sense of everything broke down. I don't know what a clinical sense of a nervous breakdown would be, but certainly all of my major relationships were tied in, and my art and my business and my activism, my community, everything was tied in, and that all got to a point of chronic danger and fell apart. And and I had to sort of find myself in that and find a way through to. I have a vision. I've always had a vision of where I'm called to go. I have to keep in touch with it. But yeah, there's certainly been this sort of middle stage of my life where I've been in the wilderness trying to find that home, you know, the new home, the new land, the new world.
Yeah, that really strikes a chord with me in the sense that when I left the organisation I founded, I did so by choice, but in another way it wasn't a choice because I felt like it was done. So, but I actually knew that I was going into a wilderness because I didn't want to join another structure, if you like.
Yeah.
But it goes back to that theme of wildness. Maybe that's one of the reasons people don't want wild, is because it is scary. But yeah, for several years now, I've been in a conscious wilderness, but there's been a lot of dark patches in that.
Yeah.
And that's what the wilderness is.
Yeah.
You can get lost in a swamp or whatever.
You can die. Like you could fall off the mountain and die. That's part of the experience, isn't it? Sorry, yeah.
No, it's you're spot on. That's it.
Yeah.
That's it. And which is why maybe mankind or humankind's appetite to tame nature is to tame our own nature, to put ourselves into safe boxes and housing estates so that we won't die.
Yeah.
But the irony being that we're going to die in the boxes.
that it's killing us. Yeah, that the machine that we've built to keep us safe is actually killing everything. Yeah, like, you know, in terms of like the global economy, industrialism, technology. So what is it that's keeping you going on some kind of heading towards the sort of, you know, it sounds like you've been following your heart. You left one world and you're looking for another one. What's kept you going?
This moment has arrived in the podcast where the guest flips the questions onto me. This has not happened as yet. God damn you. Okay, right. What has kept me on the path, so to speak? Would that be another way?
Yeah.
I'm signed up, you know. That's it. You sign up and you're committed, and there's no going back.
Yeah.
Once you're on the river, you're on the river, and tough luck. You know. So I've made a commitment, and principally that's to myself and how I live my life. I'm on this particular adventure and path until the end. And there are moments, plenty of them, where I doubt that.
Yeah.
But they're the moments where they bring me to the edge and remind me that I'm alive, which is what you're talking about, the life, you know. And that being alive is ultimately the very definition of what my quest is like, what does it mean to be alive? And how can I live the biggest life that I can live? Because I realize that life is very short. I've seen people die. Thankfully haven't lost too many close people, but I've certainly had an experience several years ago of being around someone who was dying of cancer, and just being aware of our mortality is a really important aspect of waking up every day and going, this day is not going to happen again. Might not be interviewing Luke Concannon in a house of a French woman up a back road in South County Galway again. That probably is not going to happen. So yeah, it's good to be alive, and it brings you to great places. It just brought me to New York and Boston and Vermont and New Hampshire, meeting the most incredible people, and none of that was particularly planned. And I do feel sometimes it's like following a little thread. There's a great documentary about the Kogi people in Colombia, and they talk about this golden thread that connects all of humanity, you know. But sometimes it's like this, you're following this little this thread, but you really don't know where it's going to take you, and it does require trust, and that's where spirituality does come in. And I think some people might or traditionally that has been defined by formal religion to define that as God or Jesus or Muhammad or whatever. That doesn't particularly work for me, but it's the same principle, if you like, of trusting in the golden thread, religion, whatever that is.
The spirituality, the deep nature of reality or something.
So from your own wilderness journey, Luke, do you feel like you're entering a new space in yourself with where you are in your music, but also just who you are as a person? Like we're kind of similar age, I think.
39, both of us.
Oh, we're both 39.
I feel like I fell in love on the Isle of Iona coming up on 5 years ago, and I fell in love with actually a woman raised in a really grounded spiritual context. She's a Mennonite. So the Mennonites are one of the three peace churches in Christianity. There's the Quakers, the Brethren, and the Mennonites, who are all committed to non-violence. So, for example, none of the men in her family have gone off to war. None of them went to Vietnam or the Second or First World Wars or Korea, because of their religious cultural heritage. And it was literally just such a trip to, I fell in love with this beautiful person who was from a beautiful culture, and I couldn't rationally explain what was going on. But when I really realised that I was in love with her, I had this I had this experience of sort of being in awe and of feeling like I could see the colours of the universe. I was in a train leaving her. I was on the way to Glasgow, and I was journaling, and I realised, God, I'm in love. And I had this feeling of like expansiveness, and like the universe was inside my body. I feel embarrassed and shy talking about it because it sounds like I was on LSD, but the kind of falling in love experience that maybe we long for and is in all romantic longing and songs, I had that experience. And it made me reflect on that idea that, when people talk about God is love and then falling into love, this sort of experience of opening the heart. Anyway, I that kind of gave me some grounding to be in love and in relationship, and and I think like a spiritual ground as well, to be with someone who's very whole and who has a spirituality they've grown up in. So that has given me a sense of like a home in the world. And then I've been finding my music on my own. What's my music outside of Nizlopi? And then I've been finding a way to try and get it out there. So, I've been releasing and getting a vision and executing it. So yeah, I feel like I'm finding the new world. But sometimes I just stay up all night watching cage fighting.
Luke Concannon exposed. So,
as in there are addictions and lostness that are still just still there. Like last night, I had to make myself stop looking at Conor McGregor videos and go to sleep. Do you know what I mean?
That's absolutely fair enough. You're not going to be alone, certainly in male culture. You mentioned vulnerability earlier, and there's a real theme of vulnerability in that lostness, wilderness, and that sort of brings me to your work and song around the homage to young men, because in a way this is also young Luke, or more grown up Luke. Can you talk to me about how that song came about and why you think that's still an important theme?
Yeah. So that was a song that I invited Alastair McIntosh to come down and see us to do. I'd read his book Soil and Soul, looking for kind of moral meaning, looking for a way to be a good human being. It didn't seem satisfying. What is some leadership? And his book just blew me away, Soil and Soul, People versus Corporate Power. And I finished it and I felt this strong feeling I should write to him. And I've never done that with any author. And I kind of hassled him, or just wrote to him a few times saying, like, I'm going to be hitching around Scotland for a month, woofing and visiting the places you talk about, the campaigns you ran. Any point in this whole month I can come visit you. He was like, I'm sorry, I'm really busy, I'll be away there. And I was like, but any point in the whole... And he was like, okay. Okay.
Lovely.
He was like, okay, sure. And I went round and he spent... I thought maybe he'd have half an hour for me. But he spent like a good 3 hours with me, and he really deeply listened, and it's sort of a loving and a scary presence, because he sort of peers deep into your soul. I mean, you've interviewed him, and I was 25, and I don't know, he would sort of ask me things like, what do you think underlies reality, or something, and I'd be like, I don't know. Or it's challenging, but very nurturing. And he said, you need to feel that every step is grounding you deeper and deeper into service, into compassion, into empathy, and that as an artist we need to be serving. And who do we serve? What do we serve? What sort of world do we want to see? What kind of world do we want to help with our art and the way we do it? And he said also, something that might help you feel lighter when you're on stage is to feel God or goddess or soul or spirit or nowness or truth, whatever you want to call it, coming through you. Something greater is coming through all of us. And Elizabeth Gilbert talks about how in Spain, when they say ole, it comes from the Moorish root. The Moors were in Spain, and the Moors, when they saw something of the divine in another person, when they were dancing or singing or fighting, they would go Allah, Allah, ole. So to feel that greatness, that greater thing coming through you, for me, those two things, meeting Alastair at the age of 26, and this notion of service and of God, or whatever you want to call it, coming through us, particularly when we sing, that really helped and transformed things for me. And to have a spiritual approach to live performance and to music just really fed a lot of life into what we were doing. And I think it made the gigs really strong. Those were the gigs that Ed Sheeran was at, and say, really made him want to be a live musician. And so we invited Alastair to come and record with us. And he shared that he wrote this poem for young men about what it means to become an adult when so many of us don't know how to really become full human beings, become whole. So that poem was to help young men.
It's something beautiful in that you were that young man seeking out the mentorship, and another aspect to that struck me was the idea of persistence, of that you didn't just email him and give up straight away, which is such an important aspect in the courageous journey of and look what happened, because you persisted. You end up doing this song with him, and then he ends up performing with you on stage in front of thousands of people.
Completely changed my life. I mean, I think I wrote him 3 emails in all. It just felt quite natural, but meeting him was, I'd say it was a major turning point in my life. Yeah, you've met the man.
Yeah. It's a funny one. He was coming to Ireland to give a talk, and I got in touch with him, and he ended up staying in my house. So it's that golden thread thing again. You just don't know how these things are going to play out. I'm imagining that young Ed Sheeran at the concert you mentioned, because we've all been to those gigs where the magic is just happening, like it's happening. So there's this young guy, I don't know, what is he, 14, 15, and he's just feeling it, and so like the seed has been planted there for Ed to become like the phenomena that like seems to have like, I've actually never seen anything like it. It's almost like it's some sort of Beatlemania thing.
It's like
but it's looking at the Ed Sheeran journey, like there feels to me that there's something much more to it than the songwriting, the music. It's Ed, but he's carrying that kind of magic seed spark thing, isn't he? Like I think what's interesting there is I think there's always been quite an interesting thing that happens when you get a mixture of like white and black culture, or like Celtic and African culture. The blues came out a lot of, bluegrass. It was sort of Celtic folk in the South and former slaves, black folks getting together, and something happened in that dynamism. Or the Beatles, were super influenced by black musicians and R&B, and they also were coming out of like Lennon and McCartney, from Irish families where storytelling and song is central. And I think Ed totally has that thing where he's got both threads. He grew up with trad, and he loves hip hop, and he's sort of melded those things, and it's kind of got a sexiness to it. There's some sort of juicy sensuality to it that people love. And I think one thing I find when I listen to him is that there's a passion. One of the things Alastair McIntosh said to me as a young man was like, what are you most passionate about? And if we live from that passion, that I think sometimes like the Irish rugby team or Conor McGregor or Luke Kelly embody, or, passion is a human quality. It's in so many people, like it's in Jay-Z and Talib Kweli and Immortal Technique. But when that passion is there, it can break through anything. And I think Ed's connected to the passion in what we were doing, in what Gary Dunn was doing, in what lots of people are doing, and he embodies that passion. There's something like never give up, give it everything you've got. They're sort of dangerous, like, like a roar. Yeah, he's definitely. It feels like he's appealing to this. There's like a cheekiness there, and like a boldness of one young redhead kid with a guitar rocking to 100,000 people going, why wouldn't I do it?
There's something essential that needs to happen on his journey, which often happens when people are, he's just 26, 25. So it happens when people are a bit older, but for me there has to come a point where it's there's something about entertainment has to also really serve a purpose. And for longevity, you know, John Lennon went on a journey where first of all he was thinking about girls and like, I want money and working hard and wanting to be the biggest thing in the world. That's, young people want that. They want to be a success, and that's important. But then at some point you have to raise consciousness. You have to serve something bigger than just like, you know, fame, sex, drugs, rock and roll. If you want to have longevity, there's something, and there's a new stage. It doesn't have to be totally political, but there needs to be a raising of the consciousness of the people that you're singing for.
Yeah. I think that does come with age and journey as well, for sure. I'm thinking I wish that for Conor McGregor as well. I really wish he'd bring that level of consciousness of Muhammad Ali in standing up for the people as well as just being about Conor McGregor. Yeah. And maybe people are I think people are going to give out to me for this because his fans are pretty hardcore. I'm afraid now. Maybe you're going to turn on me now. But I would love to see Ed going in that direction. And it's Bob Marley as well. It's Luke Kelly. It's Christy Moore. It's all of that. It's the hip hop, conscious hip hop stuff, Public Enemy. These are times where we need music for our causes, for our concerns, and people are suffering on a mass scale, and the industry has become such that it's so sanitized they won't touch what the people need, which is voice. Now obviously they're going with Ed, but I don't know, like I'm struggling to figure out if this is my demand or requirement. It's not up to Ed or others to serve me, but I do like what you're saying about I think that we need a soundtrack for our times as well.
And I think the best art, the stuff that most moves me, it touches all of those elements. It touches like, you know, a song like The Parting Glass that Ed covered, that's what touches to me on like deep cultural heritage and also emigration. Like, it touches on like a story of a people, or I think the reason Bob Marley is maybe the best, like one of the best singer-songwriters ever, is that he had the courage to face all of the issues. He didn't confine himself to what would be safe. You know, for him, he took big risks, and John Lennon did. And the gigs that have most gone through me like a spear have been people who've been willing to be in their integrity, not be divided selves. Do you know what I mean? And so I think that's... I know what you mean about Ed doesn't have to do what I want him to do. He doesn't have to do what anyone wants him to do. But I think all of our souls, our integrity wants us to tell deep truths. And it's hard when you're successful. There was a moment where we were on Top of the Pops live, and I knew we were live, Nizlopi were, doing JCB song. I don't know, Top of the Pops then had was it like 4 million live viewers or 12 million? It was a huge live audience. And in my heart, I felt before I went on, I was like, oh, I've got to use this opportunity. Like I wanted to say, you know, it was 2005. I wanted to say, bring our troops home from Iraq. Do what you feel is right. Trust what you feel is right. You know, like no more to Tony Blair and neoliberalism. Let's freaking start building what we want, build what we believe in. Trust yourself. You know, I wanted to have a rant in the middle on live television. And then this big fear came up in me. There was this fear like, but everyone around me, like my parents, John, my other half in the band, everyone had worked so hard to get us there, broken their back, risked like their health, money, livelihood to get us there. And if I go on some political rant and then we get shut down, we're never allowed on any radio stations, any TV, because this was the guy who you can't trust. You know, Sinead O'Connor was shut out from a lot of things because she was too dangerous. And so I didn't do it, and I've regretted it ever since, you know, because my soul, my heart was saying, there's something bigger than your little career here. You've got to say something. You've got to stand up for the fact that we're in this sort of racist imperial war in Iraq that is, you know, that led to the Syrian refugee crisis, that led to ISIS, that led to a lot of the crisis we see now in the world, but I was too scared to do it. So I think it's a lot maybe to ask other people to stand up for what they believe is right, when something about privilege stops almost all of us from doing that. And I think there needs to be, I think the reason I draw on spirituality is that there's a transformation that happens where it's like, if it's good stuff, you know, if you're a solid meditator or whatever, then you get in touch with an inner strength that allows you to do that. Does that speak to you?
Oh yeah, sure. Look, that's what it's all about. I definitely identify with that idea of privilege stopping and preventing. I find it a lot when I'm involved in building campaigns and trying to seek allies. There are so many people, perhaps 90% plus, would want to help and join in, but they feel they can't, because to do so may compromise their privilege in some way, which might be, you know, their career ultimately. Yeah. And I don't deny that reality, because there are these things called mortgages and families that people are responsible for. And so I totally respect people's need to take care of that as a primary need. The question is, if the sea is, or the sky or the sea or whatever it is becoming so toxic around us, you know, metaphorically and otherwise polluted, then your family's going to end up suffering anyway. So we need, and the more people that do row in and chip in and sign up, we build strength in numbers, where we share the privilege and we gain critical mass. And that's where like leadership kicks off, where we need somebody to put their hand up first, and then the second person comes, and before long we've got 100,000 people. And that's what we had in Dublin we mentioned the Iraq War March. Now, there are times when the people's leadership doesn't work, but at least when the final day comes, you can say, well, I did it. I did my best. I did all I could. And it all feeds history. And I'm thinking of also now the campaign in Ireland where Shell Oil and Statoil kind of brought on this havoc and chaos and a lot of violence into the community in North Mayo, where they're building a gas refinery, and the violence of the state as well. Some people would say that campaign was lost, because the refinery was eventually built over 10 years later. But there were many, many victories along the way that feed the victory of history. And one such victory came this year when the lessons of the Corrib campaign fed the people of rural County Leitrim in their campaign to ban fracking in Ireland and make Ireland one of the only countries in the world that has banned fracking.
Amazing.
You know, so you never really know how you're feeding, just as your emails and letters to Alastair McIntosh helped you to liberate yourself on stage, which kind of helped Ed do his thing, and now Ed's inspiring millions and even billions. Yeah. And we're all just feeding each other, but it requires everyone to give it a go.
Yeah.
And we should say as well that the definition of giving it a go isn't necessarily perceived fame or success, or music for that matter.
Well, all the people that we often think of as a success, you know, in the mainstream vision of success, is often super flawed, because when you look behind closed doors, their relationships are really suffering, or there's addictions or burnout or sellout. And in terms of what we were saying before about how the danger when we go out on a limb to challenge the power structure, or to challenge, to not only say we should feed the hungry, but to ask why they're hungry. You know, like, why are there refugees in Europe? Well, you know, it has a lot to do with our history of colonialism and imperialism. It has a lot to do with the way the global economy works, and the way people are disenfranchised. But the main thing I guess I want to say is that unless we do what our soul wants us to do, what we really feel in our heart, then sometimes life can really literally become not worth living, you know. I think a lot of depression, a lot of suicide happens when people aren't doing what they feel they should with their lives. So if you're not using your life for what you believe it's called to be about, then why, a lot of the joy and the purpose runs out of it, and we can do a lot of damage to ourselves and other people. So yeah, that comes up in me anyway. Luke? Yeah, I'm a barrel of laughs, sorry. My girlfriend just makes silly faces at me often. That helps me.
That definitely does help. Yeah. When you have to get over yourself. Yeah. So what's next for you, Luke? You're getting ready to do more big things in the world.
Well, I've been doing quite a lot of small things, really, but
small things, big things.
This is the artwork from a new single. It's called Join the Liberation.
Okay, this is where podcasts can't show artwork, but I am now enjoying the artwork, Join the Liberation. Wow, and it's a beautiful graphic picture of two hands coming together, almost to kind of... You tell me about it here.
Well, it was the idea that like we've been talking about reaching up together, so like reaching for something that's currently beyond us and doing it together, and there's also an intimacy in it, and that's from Rodin. That's a drawing of a Rodin sculpture, and shall I play it for you?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Cool. Why not?
It's called Join the Liberation. If you want to dance around the room. I do get a bit loud, so that's the way. Here we go. Terrible fix. This world is burning as it all falls to bits. There is such a deep yearning. We know we can do much better. We could care for the hungry. We know we could hear the voice of the poorest who say, stop bombing us, stop stabbing us, stop bombing, join the liberation, liberation, liberate. Stop bombing us, stop stabbing us, stop bombing, join the liberation. There is an election now that calls us to wake up. We can choose kindness and dignity, or the same old insanity. No, hearts are broken in Manchester, broken in Baghdad, broken in Belfast, broken people going mad, broken in Libya. Broken in Baghdad. What is it that makes us come together and hold fast? We are all one nation, really. What is it that makes us steady? Love the enemy, love the friend. Come back to us whole again and say, stop bombing us, stop stabbing us, stop killing. Join the liberation, liberation, liberate. Stop bombing us, stop stabbing us, stop killing. Join the liberation. There is an answer.
Magic, man. Oh, beautiful, beautiful. I had to really stop myself drumming on.
You should have done it.
I know. I could have
been dancing. Right?
Oh, look at man. I was trying to be a responsible podcast host here. Yeah.
It's so nice to sing it for you after this conversation as well.
Oh, that's powerful. That actually is what we're talking about. That soundtrack for our times, you know. Yeah, that's it is the violence that is coming from the mindset, from the war makers, from the terrorists, from the economic system, and the liberation being this deeper, kinder way.
Amen. Yeah. And I think the main thing that fueled that song was like, I wonder what do people in Qatar or in Somalia or in Bangladesh, what do folk who are the poorest people in the world, what are they actually thinking? And I was like, they're probably thinking, like, stop bombing us and stop this system that means that we starve. Like, you know, the famine that happened here, the economic forces that did that, you know, the laissez-faire capitalism is doing the same thing still, but just to black and brown people around the world. And so, yeah, it was just coming from, like, if we imagine ourselves into other people's shoes, it's like, yeah, they want us to stop doing certain things or our system to stop, but also, like, to join the fun, the resistance. But, yeah, help me do that, will you, Rory?
Let's do it. Look, I could talk to you all day. We're going to have to wrap it up here, and I just want to say a huge thanks for your energy, your music, your wisdom, your stories, and I look forward to following the next part of the adventure.
Well, you're so good at this. I'm really grateful for the way that you help the conversation flow and for listening. And yeah, I'm glad you stopped me talking, because I would have gone on forever.
We'll just keep the bromance going, man. We'll just keep complimenting each other. Okay, thanks very much again, Luke. Hello, Rory here again. I hope you enjoyed the podcast, and if so, can you please give it a share on social media and wherever you can. There are lots more great interviews in the archive, so check them out if you haven't done so already, and there are lots more in the pipeline. If you want to help sustain and grow the podcast and be part of the Love and Courage community, you can become a sponsor or a once-off or monthly patron at loveandcourage.org. And I'd also love to hear what you think of the podcast and any ideas you have for it, so please drop me an email to podcast@loveandcourage.org. Thanks so much for all your support. It really makes a difference. Here's to you and to your courageous journey in the world. Until next time.